Hey there, it's Rachel Mullins, the host of Hashtag No Filter Fridays on Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. My name is Brice Burge, and we will be hosting this special edition, or at least a special segment of your Soccer Passport, dealing with the seriousness down in Argentina, dealing with the Copa Libertadores second leg, the attacks on Boca Juniors by fans of their opponents, River Plate. Joining me to discuss this issue, as usual, host of Your Soccer Passport, Yvonne Sanchez Carrasco, and also Zach Wolpoff. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Better than some Boca players.
That is true. There have been some significant injuries reported, glass shards in eyes. There were some also friendly fire or collateral damage, I guess is the better way to describe that, after tear gas was used against the people attacking the bus, that some of the Boca players had problems with the tear gas as well. Multiple players went to the hospital. One of them had to get his eye patched up with his cornea being severely damaged in the incident, as again, River Plate fans attacked the Boca Juniors bus, knocking out the windows of the bus with rocks and sticks. A lot to go over with this. Yvonne, I'm going to pitch it to you first. What do you think of this situation, and what other news did I miss in the description of this?
I mean, there's such a timeline to the events that was supposed to happen yesterday that, I mean, you did a nice job glossing over. And this is something we're going to talk about. They tried delaying the game yesterday, Finally, they canceled it until today, and then they canceled it again. Well, we talked about this when we did the preview about how this was a chance for Argentine soccer, kind of, and South American soccer to be a showcase. And we said, hopefully nothing goes bad. This is a country whose away fans aren't allowed to travel to their team's games during league play, and you kind of just see. And we talked about the incident that happened in 2015 in a quarterfinals match between these two teams, and they try to build this up, the lead up to this final, as the greatest final in club soccer for any final at all, because of the passion, because of the rivalry that is Boca River Plate, and then the worst possible outcome that the Federation could have, and that Copa could have, and Copa Libertadores could have, happened to them. And it happened in a way that no one, to an extent that I think most people will be shocked, surprised about, especially those who don't follow the Copa Libertadores or South American soccer the way others do.
Zach, what about you? What are your initial comments on this situation?
This is just terrible for South American soccer in general. If you're a casual American soccer fan, you don't follow, South America is big on soccer, but you don't follow club soccer in South America, and this is your introduction, you probably don't ever want to watch club South American soccer ever again. You're probably looking at this going, okay, not only do I not want to travel to see a game there, I don't even want to watch it if this happens on a regular basis. And this is just beyond sad. This is next level emotional, like really bad for everyone involved. I just know there's going to be a movie about this, and I can't wait for that moment to come.
Yeah, 30 for 30 documentary is almost obvious at this point, especially with the diagnosed timeline of events that happened with this, and then the delays and the way things came about. This is a moment of history that is really big. I know that in the United States, we see some things occasionally with the way that fans interact, and there are some terrible instances of that kind of stuff, but they're so sporadic and they're not in major moments. It's I think there was a couple in baseball, whether it was the death threats that were given, and I forget the gentleman's name, but the Cubs fan that caught the foul ball when Moises Alou was trying. Yeah, Bartman, the Bartman ball. And there were threats against his life. You also had I think it was Dodgers fans jumping a Giants fan, or the other way around, that left a man brain dead and eventually killed him. So, I mean, there have been some terrible instances about this. You also have things like Malice in the Palace and stuff like that. American sports aren't immune to this kind of stuff. But when you deal with some of the talks and some of the instances that are going on around the world, political climates, it's not a good showcase of South America right now, especially Argentina, who is trying to make sure that they're supposed to send somebody to the Club World Cup in UAE here pretty soon, and they're running out of time for that. There were multiple delays because of postponement, and now not only do you have the question about the fans, I think the River Plate fans are just absolutely disgusting at this point, in my opinion, for what's showing up, but not just this stuff, but some of the other things that you've seen on social media. There were the photos of tear gas being used because people were trying to bum rush the stadium to get tickets or to get seats when they didn't have tickets. You had some people that were shown on Twitter strapping flares and other kind of pyrotechnic type things to the stomach of a small girl so that way they could sneak them in and she wouldn't get searched, which is a huge security issue on that way too. It was just some really disgusting things that happened up there, and I don't know how you can move on from this based on the image of all the things that have been shown so far.
I mean, yeah, I think the first thing, the mess up, it has to be to the authorities of Argentina, the local police, for not putting a proper barrier for the bus, the Boca bus, to make it to the stadium safely. There's a perfect image where you see that we can't, describing it just doesn't do it justice. We see the bus about 100 yards away from where this avalanche of fans are waiting, and it is an avalanche. It is thousands of fans waiting for the Boca bus to arrive to the River Plate Stadium. And the fact that there weren't barricades enough far away to allow the throwing to happen, this kind of sets off this whole thing. And then they're so close, they're able to smash the windows. And pretty much it looked like every window was smashed on the left side of the bus. And the bus driver said that even when his window shattered, that it was the Boca president who took over the wheel because he got hit by it or the tear gas got to him before they arrived to the arena. So that's kind of the first major thing that gets this ball rolling. Then from there, the players, especially 4 players, were having reactions to the tear gas, vomiting in the locker room. You had Perez, the captain, get glass in his eye, was taken to the hospital. And then this kind of sets this motion of the players not wanting to play. And then this is the next issue. The Federation, FIFA, Copa, Libertadores, Argentina, wherever you want, they don't just call off the game immediately. They're just trying to postpone it. I think that's the next big problem we have after we look at the fans' reaction. It's the reaction of the higher-ups who either chose not to, who understood that there was a problem and chose to try to push its way through for money reasons or whatever they said, or for just being idiots, I guess is the best way, for being selfish, corrupt idiots.
It's frustrating in that regard because the initial delay was only by an hour. You still had players, you still had officials that were preparing for their normal things. and then it was pushed back a little bit later. But you actually had it at one point where the doctors said that this game should be played, that some of the complaints about delaying this game was not going to be upheld because the players were physically able to go out there and play when multiple players had lacerations from the glass. And it is in that aspect because now you're talking about players. When you're talking about player safety, there are some things that, yes, that are outside of the arena that I think that you enumerated very well, Yvonne, and I appreciate that. But now as you switch up to the delay process and getting these things done, you don't have the proper care of your players based on your soccer authorities at this point. Your soccer authorities, now that they have the ability to do something to make sure that these players are safe and ready and putting off the best performance they possibly can, CONMEBOL is saying no. They're saying, delay it by an hour, delay it by an hour and a half, delay it by 2 hours and 15. Oh, we'll play it tomorrow, and then it's delayed again. Now it's delayed indefinitely. So with that delay process, Zach, and I'll pitch it to you now. Where is the level of responsibility for CONMEBOL and the other Argentinian soccer authorities in this process?
Well, there's a huge level of blame on everybody involved. Not only Boca Juniors, but River Plate, the Federation, FIFA. The fact that they called FIFA and FIFA said that we need to play this game is beyond me. If you're the president, if I'm the president of FIFA, and I'm seeing this, I'm going, no, you need to suspend the game. You cannot have a fair competition. And the fact that River Plate allowed this to happen and local authorities didn't step up and do more ahead of time. They knew this is a big match. They knew this is everyone's life. They knew many people have a lot of money on this game. Why are you allowing fans to throw rocks and sticks and stones into the team bus? It's beyond comprehension to think of that much of a security failure. And then to bum rush the stadium like they did is just beyond me. I'm so glad I was not there as much as I wanted to be there. And I know a friend of mine who made it down to Argentina. He's a Boca fan, just to send the team off and hopefully be there for the celebration after. And he said it was just a gigantic mess on everyone's behalf.
How much of this at this point is actually a security flaw? How much of this is ingrained in Argentinian society? What will be the investigation process after this? I mean, I'm not sure if the three of us can actually answer that question without being, boots on the ground in Argentina right now. But when dealing with this kind of stuff, you have all these little aspects involved, and you have South American politics, which for a host of reasons are not as trustworthy as we'd like them to be. And you've got security concerns for player safety, just general safety, possible terrorist attack safety. I mean, there's tons of issues that can be held at any of these moments. But if all this stuff is coming in there, what kind of investigation process should we expect? And what kind of investigation process does the situation deserve after this is done? And do you do it before the before the reschedule? That's another aspect that's involved.
Well, I don't think you can do it before the reschedule because of the time concerns, because of the Club World Cup that's going to happen. But you need to do this quickly and you need to do this swiftly. This needs to be a massive look at from the time the team left the hotel and the bus route and why security was not as prevalent as it should have been in those public squares and in those areas, and why they were allowed to throw rocks. First of all, where they found the rocks? Did they bring them in? Were they in their pockets or what? And this really should be very thoroughly investigated, and it should be looked upon by pretty much every single major crime outlet. If I'm Argentina, I'm calling the FBI and trying to see if they would be willing to help to aid us investigation into this, because it's just crazy. But again, this is Argentina, and I'm not quite sure they would be willing to do that.
I mean, they wouldn't be willing to do that. You had the president of Argentina before the finals say he would welcome and he would like the idea for visiting fans to be able to go to the away games before the series even started. And, something that's hard to kind of grasp in American culture is how political and how in-depth a lot of these teams are, especially these higher-up teams, with local government, with large government, because of the influence these teams had at a very decades ago, and how money kind of swings in these countries. And these, this Boca support, and the president of this is connected to that. This is very embedded into the Argentine culture. And, this is a reflection, and it's just been magnified of what the problems that the Argentine league has had with controlling their fans. And it's just magnetized to a most degree. And then you saw the magnitude of the corruption or of the lack of care for the players from the federation as well. Carlos Tevez, probably the most influential player of both of either team because of who he's played for, the World Cups he's played for, and what he's achieved in Europe. He said we don't want to play. They're forcing us to play. CONMEBOL, FIFA threatened Boca a 5-year ban off of the Copa Libertadores if the reports are true, that if they forfeited the game. My theory is that behind closed doors, both set of players decided that they're not going to play. I think the River players probably said in their locker room, we're not going out playing if these are the circumstances. Because how did all of a sudden they decide, we're going to cancel it? It's because they just kept doing the minimal delays. So obviously, I think the players had something to do with the delaying of the day finally, but so I don't think it was the federation at all, and I think that's something important to remember and look at too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because now as you start to bring that up there, as much as we go after a lot of the River Plate fans in this case, I thought that River Plate did a good job in terms of their organization saying that this should be delayed. Players made it very vocal that should be the case. I think the players showed the humanity of the issue better than anybody else that could have, and that is a significant aspect that has to be brought up, and we weren't able to do so far in this segment. But now, the other aspect of that makes it very frustrating to me is that Argentina has a Ministry of Sport. Argentina, you talked about the political ties and the ingrained aspect of some of the major groups that are involved in it, and I've had the chance to work with some South American sport federations in the past, and it can be tough if you don't have the right back to scratch. Essentially, you can be dead before you even get started, no matter how good or bad your idea would be. And now that you're at this point, initially, when talking about things in this level, I think that things have to come down not from CONMEBOL, but from actual FIFA. FIFA's got to be taking the lead in this case, because it's got to be above and beyond. And I think Uruguay's situation with Uruguay's current federation and the investigation that FIFA has put into them, and the jurisdictional bickering back and forth between the Uruguayan government and FIFA about whether or not there would be investigations into Uruguay's soccer federation. There were some touches of it with Peru as well that are starting to pop up more and more. I think if FIFA got directly involved with this, that it would have a better shot of actually getting some traction, because I don't think CONMEBOL is really capable at this point to do any kind of investigation underneath themselves, whether it's for the simplest of things or whether it's something massive like this. I mean, you're talking about some major overlaps with security. You're dealing with some major overlaps in terms of cultural output and image of soccer as a whole. And I think right now, with some of the other political things that are going on, seeing that, unfortunately, I don't like bringing this up too much, because it's a soccer show, but earlier today there was reports that came out that tear gas and rocks and sticks were being thrown and used back and forth between people from the so-called migrant caravan and U.S. Border Patrol. There's just a ton of things right now where you start to see the military-style actions, the police-style actions versus citizens, as well as a lot of other commonalities that you really got to nix right away. And I don't know who's going to step up and say this is the the policy and practice that needs to be done right here, right now. Because right now I'm not seeing anybody take that leadership role.
It's definitely not going to be FIFA. I can tell you that. People were there, and they were pushing for the game to be played Saturday night. So I don't think FIFA at all. I mean, what's the point of having what seems to be a corrupt system like Copa be investigated by what's a more corrupt system than their dad's FIFA? It just kind of seems ridiculous in that regard. So it just pretty much be, just sheep following sheep. And I think one of the things that people, I think, didn't recognize about the situation too, about the problem with delaying the game instead of just calling it off on Saturday is then you had to get all these people out of the stadium. You had to get the players back out of the stadium too. You had riots with fans and the police all going all night. The quicker you could have nipped this in the bud, the quicker these things could have been handled. But the later you wait, the more you ran these players, these people, these officers, everybody at risk too. And I think that was something that was overlooked, the aftermath of canceling and waiting so long to cancel instead of just canceling it right off the bat on Saturday.
Well, to your point about FIFA not doing it, what really I think is going to happen is the Court of Arbitration of Sport is going to have to step in and come down. Because whatever they come up with between FIFA and CONMEBOL is one team's not going to like it and they're going to challenge it, and the Court of Arbitration of Sport is going to be the one to try to separate out this mess and come up with a quote-unquote fair ruling here. And that will need to come rather quickly because the Club World Cup is coming soon. So,
yeah, that's one thing about delaying the actual process to determine a winner. I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily wants to see a team be awarded a final of this magnitude because of things that happened not even in the stadium. I think that's bad. That would be bad for soccer. That being said, trying to figure out a way to make it actually work out all right is a struggle. But that's the delay aspect on both sides. Is that, are you delaying to push the game off, or are you delaying to figure out what you're going to do? And one thing I think that there's a good counterpoint to what Yvonne brought up about getting the players, getting the people out of the stadium in a healthy way, is that security-wise, there would be reasons to delay things, is because if there is an attack, or if there is a diversion type approach where it is something more serious than just a bus attack by hardcore fans against an opposing team, then you have to weigh the security risks, and keeping people in place and not moving them around is just as good of a security move to make as it is to get everybody out and evacuate the situation as quickly as possible. So there are some like game time decisions that are being made in that regard, but based on the fact that everything has come down in terms of doing it for television status, doing it for FIFA telling them to do things because people are coming in and saying things, player safety, fan safety, worker safety in the stadium, police safety, the safety in general for all these individuals as a collective or as individual groups were not on the forefront of the organization's mind, whether that be CONMEBOL, whether it be the two teams directly involved, whether that be FIFA, anybody. Safety was actively disregarded by people, and it is frustrating, and it's always going to give a black eye in this case because they did not express themselves correctly.
It was. I mean, and now the next thing is how close can you get the game? One thing they don't want to do either, they don't want to play this game, and it's been announced. They don't want to have this be a night game. There's a reason the other game was a day game. There's a reason it's on the weekends. They want this to be, they want it on the weekend so the game doesn't have to be in the evening to try to reduce the danger of these things happening as well. So now you have to figure you only have so many weekends before the turn of the month and then the Club World Cup and all these things. I think they've even said that they might just have the one-off game in Dubai, and then the winner stays and the loser goes, considering the first leg was tied 2-2. And, that's an interesting thing. What do you do next? What are the options? You're on a crunch time. There are some things you cannot do. You can't have it on a weekday night just for safety. You Yeah, so it's not. What are the next steps? And all these things have to happen probably before an investigation even starts, because it's just the way it is. It's going to take a long time for that thing to happen.
I mean, I think the idea of moving the game to Dubai is probably the safest option out of everything. The teams are going to meet on Tuesday to discuss this, but I really do believe that moving the game to Dubai is not only safe for everyone, but it makes sense. No one's going to be involved. There will probably be people who do travel from Argentina or elsewhere in the world to Dubai for the game, but it's not going to be nearly as violent or nearly to the magnitude as it was on Saturday and Sunday.
I mean,
or an empty stadium.
Or an empty stadium is, I think, probably going to be the most likely of situations. When you have a lot of this kind of stuff, I mean, the Orioles and the White Sox played for an empty stadium when they had the Baltimore attacks. I think you know that one a little well there, Zach, too, because you're from that area. So
I watched that game. That was by far the strangest baseball game I have ever seen in my life. But at the same time, you know what? The teams had fun with it. The commentators had fun with it, and they tried to make the best out of what they could. So
that being said, though, go ahead, Yvonne.
Well, I think part of the reason, too, imagine if they would have played on Saturday or Sunday and Boca won. What would have happened because you're supposed to celebrate on the field. Could you imagine what would have transpired if on Saturday or Sunday Boca would have won in front of the fans who were already heated, already fired up, and had all this already happened? Or can you imagine if Boca would win in a stadium that's full, that's completely full? They would have to be escorted into the locker room, and to try to get them in before probably fans even crash the field, I would assume.
Well, probably they would want to escort them onto the team bus and out of the stadium before they even handed them the trophy or handed them on the bus or in the hotel, because that would just be a giant security nightmare. Fans would be rushing the field. Players would be thrown. Rocks would be thrown. It would be a nightmare scenario in total.
It would be a nightmare scenario, but that is the proper protocol for trophy presentations. There are overwhelming protocols that deal with game day operations for soccer matches, and a lot of them come from higher ups. There are specific things that are almost predictable because it's a tournament and a championship of such a high level. That is something that a lot of people don't necessarily view and realize, but it makes it predictable for some hardcore fans that have seen this kind of stuff beforehand. It does create a safety risk in that regard, because there's no way in any possibility that you would actually be able to make sure that you had enough security to prevent all those Boca fans, Boca fans or Plata fans, anybody in that situation from actually rushing the field. And I think playing to an empty stadium is your best option right now, because even if you if you have the game in Dubai, you've got two Argentinian teams that are this hardcore about it. Dubai may not even, UAE may not even have the ability for them to come over for this kind of stuff. UAE has some really strict travel laws. I mean, and when you deal with it, UAE also has some very strict public appearance laws. So when you're going to a country that has such an influence with that kind of stuff and how strict everything is, and that you're basically asking to create an international incident that UAE did not sign up for, I don't know that moving this to Dubai is really an option compared to putting both teams in Lima or putting both teams in Rio or something along those lines. Moving it out of the country, empty stadium this Saturday, minimize your overall aspects in terms of travel, and then sticking it where they can't get somebody there. I think that's going to be a better option than to try to stick it in Dubai.
Yeah, and I think so. Here's the counter arguments, not mine, but just playing devil's advocate. That Boca had the first game at hand, so that's an advantage for them. So playing it in Dubai takes away the home field advantage. Right? You play it in Lima, same thing. You play it anywhere, it's the same thing. You're taking away the home field advantage that Boca had. And it just so happened that it ended in a 2-2 draw. There's no away goal rule in the finals. So it essentially becomes a one-off game, which is why this works. Another alternative, which is probably the people like the least, is hand Boca a 3-0 win like they did to River when River Plate got attacked in 2015, and they win the trophy. And that is the worst outcome from a sporting aspect. But I think in a long-term plan, if you really want to send a message, that is the best way to do it. Because this isn't just a few bad apples that just rotten everything else. This is something that is embedded in Argentine soccer culture. It just got magnified in a world stage because everybody was watching this time. So I think if you want to be extreme, one way is just give Boca a 3-0 win and give them the trophy. And then that's a way to send a message to the fans and to the federations that you don't mess around with things of this nature.
All right, Brice, I will commend you. That was a really good point about the UAE and their public appearance laws. I completely spaced on that. So, but yeah, I do like playing in front of an empty stadium. That still worries me a bit because you still have both sets of fans watching it somewhere in town, presumably on giant screens like you saw in the World Cup, and possible for riots and things to be broken and whatnot is still very high.
You know, it is very high, but that's something to be expected at this level. Vancouver has riot policies for whenever the Canucks make the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, luckily for Vancouver, they haven't had to use it in a while because Vancouver hasn't made the playoffs in the NHL for a while. But, I mean, Vancouver riots like nobody else when they lose a cup. So, I mean, it is frustrating in that regards to see the level of public awareness. But if you're doing it, the question is when you're actually setting up what to do from this point on, you cannot immense yourself with the problems that are almost inevitable at locations that you do not have to worry about. You have to worry about making sure that the game is played, if it is played at all, and you have to guarantee that safety is involved. And more importantly, with how much money is involved, I don't think that they will give a 3-0 victory because, one, there's tons of money that's involved. That game's going to get played, even though I think the precedent is there, as Yvonne described. Just because the precedent is there does not necessarily mean that it is good enough in this circumstance, because this is the last time the Copa Libertadores final will be a home leg and leg type thing. They will be moving to a one-off location, winner-take-all format after this. That's one of the reasons why this was going to be the game of the century and why there was such lead-up to everything, is because they were specifically planning to avoid this exact situation in the future until it bit them in the tail this time because of who's playing. So now that you've got the scenario, this is something that's never going to have another precedent like it again, because you're changing the format. And that's something that will impact the decision-making process, because they can do something extremely wacky as well. They could completely nix the previous home result, including any cards that were brought up, any kind of other situations, any kind of suspensions, punishments. They could just completely ignore the first leg in Boca and have a winner-take-all final in a neutral city, which, you know, that's a possibility too. But because of this format change, anything is an option at this point. And if they truly want to make sure that CONMEBOL doesn't look terrible, they need to have a wacky solution that's a home run. And I don't know what that will be, because anything else is going to make them look like an idiot and look like that, and make them look like they don't care about their player safety or fan safety or worker safety.
Brice, unfortunately, they don't play baseball in Argentina. They play soccer, so they're definitely not hitting a home run with this. They are definitely swinging out, regardless of what they do.
Well, they could always move it into another city in Argentina, like way away from everything else, and make both teams have to travel. Both teams are at a disadvantage at this point. And they're just kind of like, well, it's your safety that's involved, and that's what we care about. That's a wacky solution right there.
Do you think that they'd be safe in a different city in Argentina?
Yeah, these are the two most followed teams in Argentina. They have fans all over Argentina. It'll just be those groups of fans from those from nearby that will now attend this, and people will travel there. So I'm not sure if that's. I mean, that's. I don't have the right answer to this either. So, but I guess that'd be the counterpoint to that. Is they have a following anywhere and everywhere where in Argentina. Where if you put in another city in Argentina, it's just going to be those sets of fans going there, and some of them, because these guys don't have a problem taking a bus for 12 hours, 24 hours to get where they need to go to follow their team either. I think that's something that's underrated about, or we don't understand about the passion that these guys have for these, specifically these two teams, and specifically this rivalry.
How can this situation be made any worse? Let's go continue down the rabbit hole of bad circumstances, because we've talked about what can make things better, and we're scratching our brains with lack of ideas, but this could still get way worse. There's still bad things that could happen. What would make this situation go even worse?
Do you want a list?
Yeah, I want to, because, at this point, one of the things that struggles, and that's why we're doing kind of a special thing, and with the length that we're going to, we might as well either make this the episode for this week, or we'll just record another episode, because there's a lot of things that happen in soccer this week, and I think that this is an absolute turning point for worldwide soccer appreciation at a club level, because it is something that is so obscure to be done, but also one of the biggest moments that I can think of in my soccer life that didn't deal with an actual event on the pitch. And that being said, if things can go worse, we should be discussing them specifically, because we need to be talking about preparing ourselves for the absolute worst case scenario. I mean, if they move this to a neutral site location, could we see hotels getting attacked? Could we see more busing problems? Could we see more attacks? Could we see situations with bomb threats? Or are we talking about the worst case scenarios here? Or do you think that we're done with this and whatever the decision will be made will be rectified? Or do you think that the local authorities will have a better grasp on things? Like, there's so many levels about what happens from this point on that doesn't just take about the good options that are there. We've pretty much all said that we don't have faith in CONMEBOL or FIFA or local authorities to do the right thing. How bad can this get?
I mean, Buenos Aires could just burn to the ground, I guess would be the worst case scenario, where they play the game. Let's say Boca wins, and River Plate, the fans, because there's fans, there's thousands of fans outside the stadium. There's more fans, outside the stadium, nearby the stadium, and those are in those areas than in the arena. So then they start rioting, and then you have local authorities coming, and then you have Boca fans making their way over to rub it in the face of River Plate fans, and all of a sudden you don't have enough local authorities, enough authorities from Argentina to control the whole thing, and it's just mayhem. I guess that would be the worst case scenario, where the whole city of Argentina is pretty much just that makes the LA riots look like a kindergarten party, would be the worst case scenario, I think.
I definitely think a bombing of the stadium or the team hotel or the team bus is definitely the worst case scenario. Any sort of terrorist attack or a terrorist threat is really the worst case scenario here. It doesn't matter if it's being played in Dubai, Buenos Aires, Mexico City, Miami. Heck, you can play it on the North Pole, and they're still probably going to find some way to make it bad. It's the whole thought of what's the worst possible scenario is really just a gigantic terrorist attack. And how would they deal with it? I don't know if Argentina has the capability to handle that sort of situation.
That's what's frustrating about this point, is that we know that the teams are coming together. How much of the Argentinian national government is going to be involved in this decision-making process? And I think that's kind of a big factor for me moving forward about how good or bad this thing could get. I mean, when you talk about Argentina, that's still a relatively stable country, but it is, comparatively, but you still have some issues there where you would have to bring in almost federal forces, national government forces to help supply extra stuff. Because the other thing too is that if you're dealing with this kind of stuff and you're asking local authorities to be calm in a situation like this, and then they're also emotionally attached to everything. It's tough. I mean, you also don't know what's going to happen too when there's children involved, as seen by the photo of that guy strapping flares to his, to a young girl's chest and torso. So, I mean, there's a ton of problems that could happen in terms of the collateral damage that's involved. And for me, that's the worst possible thing, is that with the level of disregard to player safety that I've seen from everything so far, now you're going to adjust. You're going to adjust just enough to start giving some players and staff and the teams the safety that they deserve, and they're going to overlook something, and then there's going to be 3 dead people out in the parking lot. There's going to be 20 dead people out in the parking lot regardless of what happens. There's going to be a riot. There's going to be a bar fight. There's going to be a hit and run, something like that, where all of the focus is now redetermined on providing the safety that they should have done previous to this, and civilians are going to get hurt. That, I think, is the worst case scenario for me, because I think it's the most plausible based on the situations. And so it is frustrating. Now, that being said, what's the best thing that can happen? The best thing that can happen is that everybody's rosy and cheery, and we all love each other, and everything goes off without a hitch. I mean, you could have everything so localized that it wouldn't be a problem. You have the ability of individual locations, hiring extra security at bars, at restaurants that are watching the matchup. You have the capability of people localizing and really making things at a hyper-local individual situation where you minimize the options based on personal individualistic choices on such a micro level that the macro level regulates itself. So, I mean, you could have some really good things happen from this, and this is still an amazing game. So, I mean, there are some good things going to happen. Let's actually talk about what happens if this game continues at this point. A number of players from Boca Juniors have had different levels of injuries. Some of them will be back. I mean, if you really want to think about it, the kind of glass cuts that they're getting isn't too bad compared to the turf burn that some of the women were getting in Canada in the last World Cup. So, I mean, it is capable for the majority of those players to go out there and play. What happens if and when this game actually does happen? Let's talk about what happens on the pitch. How does everything impact the players at this point?
I think it motivates the Boca players more in a way. I guess the most severe one was Perez getting cut in the eye. That hurts more than turf burn. But I guess, yeah, it's a motivation for the Boca players. And I guess what I would want to see in the field before the game would even start is the unification of the players to kind of speak out to the fans and tell them, control yourselves, on the field. It's almost like after this incident that what happens on the field is almost minimalized to the utmost degree for what's already transpired. And you just hope that whatever the result is, that the aftermath stays calm. But on the field, I think, it motivates the Boca players. Hopefully they have enough time to recuperate and to get back to the physical peak for this final. And same thing for the River player, the mentality aspect of it. Can you stay focused once the kickoff actually starts? Can you put yourself in the right frame of mind? And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for the players, is the mental aspect of it.
To Brice's point about getting extra security in, I know for the World Cup, there were Russian forces all across, literally everywhere. You walk down a public square, there was a Russian guy carrying an AK-47. Going to the subway, there were Russian officers in the subway checking out, making sure things were okay. So that's something going forward that they should probably think about, especially if it is going to be played in River Plata. It's just, that would be probably the safest bet thing to do. But on the field, I mean, this is going to motivate Boca a lot more, because they know they're hated. They know that they want to do this so much more because it's going to be a great comeback story and yada, yada, yada. It's just, But if you plot that, you have to go, okay, they're coming in with a bigger chip on their shoulder than what you would expect them to have. And so you need to defend that and be ready for that ahead of time.
I can't imagine how hard this must be for River Plate, their fans, their coaches, their trainers. I mean, there's a level of solidarity that pops up with this kind of stuff when you realize that it's one small contract decision that could have made a difference between me being on either side. You know, that level of solidarity that pops up, to really empathize with the situation with your opponents on the other side of the pitch, it all goes away. It's no longer the situation of I hate that guy. I want him to struggle. I want him to fail. It now comes to a situation where that could have been me. And there's a lot of connection that happens that way. I can't imagine the level of professionalism that every single River Plate staff member has to have at this point on, to have that focus, to have that ability to go out there and do what's needed for everybody involved. Because, I mean, the best possible thing that they can do is go out there and make sure that there's a compelling final, to make sure that they, whatever team wins this out plays, both teams play to the best of their ability, and that you ignore some of the comments about, like, well, this off the field impacted so much. It's like, no, you need to have another compelling game like the first leg was. And if anything short of that compelling a first leg is going to be a failure, where it's just going to be the greatest game of the century that never happened. This is a monumental moment in sports, because I cannot think of another matchup that had this level of uncertainty before having the match of the century in any other sport, any other country. I can't imagine that level, and I can't think of anything in the past. This is a monumental moment for sports.
Yeah, definitely not in the past. The only thing I think that could be another soccer equivalent would be if Celtic played Rangers in a European finals, and it was held in Scotland. That'd probably be the only thing that would be equivalent to it when you talk about the disdain for both teams to each other, the fans' disdain to each other, the cultural and the historical aspect of what these clubs represented when they were first started to where they are now, and kind of the monopolization of sports and how money has changed everything. But what the roots of what these clubs represent and represented when they first started to where they are now, and the disdain, and why this disdain is existent in these cultures. This is the biggest sporting thing to happen in soccer, at the very least, in a very long time. And I mean, to recuperate what they've lost over the weekend is going to be hard. And yeah, there is nothing else to compare it to.
Well, my argument would be, it would be like Marseille playing Paris Saint-Germain at Saint Denis in a European final. It's not going to happen, but it would be very similar because of the hatred that they both have. There's a huge amount of hatred. I can go into great detail, but I'm not going to, because we're not talking about the Classique. But again, to pick up the steam that they had going into this match is going to be almost impossible to have happen again. They had so many eyes watching this match, so many eyes from people all over the world just wanting to tune in just to see this game, and for it to all dissipate, it's going to be really hard for them going forward, because there was a lot of television money to be had for that game.
Before we wrap up this special edition of Your Soccer Passport, first of all, I do want to say, because we missed it because we weren't sure how long this was going to take, that Your Soccer Passport is sponsored by Squadcast, as podcasters that deal with analysts and guests from around the world. Being able to record remotely is key. Current industry standards rely heavily on internet connection, but Squadcast changes that with a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. The audio is recorded locally as high-quality WAV files, then uploaded to the host computer, allowing some great audio quality. To get started with your remote podcasting recording experience, go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial. Before we wrap this up, do you gentlemen have any further comment on the situation that hasn't been able to be brought up in this discussion? This is a very it's a very unique situation. We haven't had this kind of just like raw like discussion of a level like this, so I want to make sure that you guys have a chance to put in all opinions.
Ivan, I'll let you go first.
I think it's just I think we've I've been able to kind of digest what I wanted to say throughout the different events that have happened throughout the last couple of days of what's happened. And, for someone who is Latin American and has seen this kind of manifest itself through different times, it's not surprising. It's more just sad that it happened at this level and what it happened. But, to say it's a surprise, it's not a surprise if you follow Latin American soccer. It's just kind of like sad that it happened at this magnitude, I guess. But yeah, those would be my final thoughts on it.
I have one remaining question. Why is Boca traveling in a team-branded bus, especially for an event of this magnitude? I understand you're Boca, you want to show off. But when you're traveling through a public square that has thousands of years of rivals, you're just a target then. And why aren't you traveling in one or two or three coaches, like the way the president does in his limo? You don't know which of his is really he's in. So if you were to try to shoot them, you would not be able to, unless you guessed correctly, you would not know. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the ground for some really contentious and dangerous union protests, and seeing what some of the temporary workers have had to go through, and the level of security that's involved with that seems to be way higher than the stuff that was going on with this. And it never ceases to amaze me, and I guess this is my final point that I'd like to end on, is that it never ceases to amaze me about the level of dedication to be involved with a person's fandom based on something recreational when there are actual problems to be solved. And that makes me sad because, Argentina is a pretty good country overall, but they have their problems too. And just like the U.S., just like everybody else, I do this podcast for fun. I don't get any money from it. So, it's but I also volunteer and I fight the man. I fight the local government. I stand up for that kind of stuff. I can only imagine what the world could be if the stuff that was being done in the level of hatred shown to this recreational soccer team would be if we started doing that kind of stuff and putting the energy into positive situations where we could make a difference in the world. So that's it for this. Zach Wolpoff, Ivan Sanchez, Carrasco, Brice Burge here on Your Soccer Passport, a special Copa Libertadores edition dealing with the attack on Boca Juniors and the aftermath of that incident. We want to thank you for following us. You can please get after us on Twitter and listen to Your Soccer Passport wherever you find your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, and more. On behalf of all those other guys and Public House Media, I want to thank you for listening to Your Soccer Passport, sponsored by Squadcast.fm.